The morning sun poured gently through the tall windows of the city bank, illuminating rows of neatly arranged counters and the soft hum of computers. Customers shuffled in and out, some in a hurry, others taking their time to fill out forms or speak with tellers. Among them walked an elderly black man, carefully adjusting his coat against the mild chill. His hair was silver, neatly combed, and his eyes carried a sense of calm wisdom that came from years of experience. He moved slowly but with dignity, each step deliberate and measured. He approached the first open counter, his hands holding a small envelope containing his deposit. Behind the counter stood a young bank employee, fresh out of training, wearing a crisp uniform and a name tag that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. He glanced at the man with a quick, dismissive look, his eyes narrowing slightly as if sizing him up. Without much thought, he muttered under his breath, loud enough for nearby customers to hear, "You don't look like you belong here." The elderly man paused, giving the employee a steady, calm look. He responded politely, "Good morning. I would like to make a deposit, please." His voice was soft but carried a quiet firmness that seemed to surprise the young man. The employee smirked and leaned slightly forward, as though trying to assert dominance. "Sir, are you sure you know how to fill out these forms? Sometimes it's complicated for people who aren't familiar with these things." His words dripped with condescension, and a few customers nearby glanced over, their expressions shifting from curiosity to concern. The elderly man didn't raise his voice. Instead, he smiled faintly and replied, "I think I can manage, thank you." He handed over the envelope and the completed deposit slip. Every movement was careful, deliberate, and precise, showing that he had done this countless times before. The young employee snorted, as if mocking the man silently. "You do realize there are rules you have to follow, right? Not everyone can just walk in and expect to deposit money without any trouble." His tone was almost taunting, and he leaned back slightly, watching the man fumble with his envelope, trying to make him feel incompetent. Despite the humiliation, the elderly man kept his composure. He looked around, noticing the stares from other customers who were clearly uncomfortable with the interaction. One woman, clutching her purse, whispered to her friend, "That's just rude." He didn't have to say that. The elderly man caught her gaze and gave a small, grateful nod. It was a quiet acknowledgement, a shared moment of understanding between strangers. The employee, growing impatient, sighed loudly. "Sir, can you hurry up? There are other people waiting." He tapped the counter, emphasizing his impatience. The man, keeping his dignity intact, slowly handed over the deposit slip and envelope. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, as if showing that he would not be rushed or intimidated. As the transaction proceeded, the young employee continued his barrage of subtle insults. "Do you even know how to check your balance? Sometimes people forget and get into trouble. We wouldn't want that to happen to you." His words were designed to belittle, to make the elderly man feel small, but they had the opposite effect. The man's calm demeanor, his patience, and his quiet confidence seemed to create a kind of invisible shield against the employee's hostility. Other customers began to whisper among themselves, some expressing shock, others admiration. "I can't believe he said that," one young man murmured. "The way he's handling it is impressive. He's not losing his cool at all." The elderly man overheard, his expression remaining neutral, yet inside he felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that not everyone approved of the employee's behavior. The employee, growing more frustrated by the lack of reaction from the man, finally slammed the envelope onto the counter with an exaggerated gesture. "You see, some people just don't understand how banking works. Maybe you should ask for help next time." He leaned back, crossing his arms, thinking he had asserted his superiority. The elderly man, with a polite but firm smile, said, "I understand perfectly. Thank you for your assistance." There was no anger in his voice, only a calm clarity that made the young employee momentarily pause. The words were simple, yet they carried a weight that the young man didn't anticipate. At that moment, a small child nearby tugged at his mother's sleeve, curious about the tension at the counter. "Mom, why is that man being so mean?" she asked softly. The mother whispered back, "Sometimes people forget to be kind, sweetie, but the other man is showing how to stay calm and strong, even when someone is rude." The elderly man noticed the exchange and gave the child a warm smile, a small gesture that spread a quiet ripple of respect through the waiting area. Finally, the transaction was complete. The man collected his receipt and envelope, making sure everything was in order. He turned slightly to address the young employee one last time, not with anger but with a sense of quiet dignity. "Have a good day," he said simply, his eyes meeting the employee's with a calm intensity that suggested patience, experience, and self-respect. The young employee muttered something under his breath and returned to his paperwork, avoiding eye contact. The elderly man walked away slowly, taking each step with purpose, leaving the counter behind but carrying with him an invisible aura of grace and dignity that had not gone unnoticed. Other customers whispered among themselves, sharing their admiration and disbelief at the young employee's behavior and the elderly man's composed response. Outside the bank, the elderly man paused for a moment, taking a deep breath of the crisp morning air. The city around him moved quickly, cars honking, people rushing to their destinations, but he stood still for a brief second, collecting his thoughts. Despite the humiliation he had endured inside, he felt a sense of calm satisfaction. He had handled the situation with patience, dignity, and composure. He hadn't allowed anger to dictate his response, nor had he let someone else's prejudice define his self-worth. He continued his walk, each step purposeful and measured, blending into the flow of the city streets. The incident at the bank would remain in his memory, a reminder of the challenges that still existed in the world, but also a reminder of the strength found in patience, respect, and self-discipline. He carried himself not with bitterness but with quiet pride, knowing that he had upheld his dignity and set an example, even if only a few had noticed it. That day, in a small but significant way, a lesson was quietly imparted, that true strength often lies in restraint, that dignity is maintained not by confrontation but by composure, and that even in the face of prejudice one can remain unshaken. As the elderly man disappeared into the bustling streets, he left behind more than a completed bank transaction. He left a subtle but powerful impression of humanity, patience, and quiet resilience. The elderly man walked slowly down the busy city sidewalk, the morning sun warming his back. Though the air was filled with car horns, footsteps, and distant chatter, he felt a strange calm after the incident at the bank. He knew that moments like these could easily stir anger, but he had chosen patience and dignity instead. Still, a small part of him wondered how someone could treat another human being with such disrespect simply because of appearances. He reached a small cafe he often visited on his morning walks. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside, greeted warmly by the barista who knew him by name. He ordered his usual coffee and settled by the window, pulling out a small notebook to jot down thoughts. The previous encounter replayed in his mind, but rather than feeling bitterness, he reflected on the lessons it provided. He scribbled a few notes, reminding himself to always handle prejudice with calm and clarity, to respond with dignity rather than confrontation. Meanwhile, back at the bank, the young employee recounted the incident to a coworker. "You should have seen it," he said, leaning against the counter, a hint of pride in his voice. He looked so confused. Honestly, I don't think he knew what he was doing. His coworker frowned, uncomfortable with his tone, but choosing not to respond too strongly. Other staff members nearby had overheard fragments of the conversation, some shaking their heads in disbelief. A few regular customers who had witnessed the encounter whispered to each other, expressing their shock and disapproval. "I can't believe he said that to him," one woman said softly. "It was completely unnecessary. That man didn't deserve it." Her friend nodded, the two glancing occasionally at the young employee, who remained oblivious to the growing tension around him. The elderly man finished his coffee and stepped outside. The city streets were alive, people hurrying to offices, buses pulling away from stops, bicycles weaving between pedestrians. He walked slowly, savoring the energy of the morning, feeling neither rushed nor angry. In his mind, he reviewed his options. He could report the incident formally, but he preferred to handle things in a quieter, more effective way, without making a public scene. He knew there were better ways to bring about understanding than confrontation. As he walked, he met a friend at a corner park. They exchanged greetings and sat on a bench beneath a large oak tree, its leaves casting soft shadows on the pavement. His friend listened carefully as the man recounted the morning's events. "It's unbelievable how people can be so rude," his friend said, shaking his head. "You should report him. That kind of behavior can't go unchecked." The elderly man smiled faintly, shaking his head. Sometimes patience and dignity speak louder than complaints, but I will consider what to do carefully. Meanwhile, the story of the bank encounter began to travel quietly through social networks and community circles. Some customers had mentioned it to friends and family, each retelling adding a bit of astonishment at the young employee's arrogance. Within the bank itself, staff whispered about the incident, noting how the elderly man had remained calm despite the condescension and rudeness he faced. The employee, unaware of the growing awareness around his behavior, continued his tasks with a sense of self-satisfaction, convinced he had asserted authority correctly. Later that afternoon, the elderly man returned home. The city's bustle faded into a quiet neighborhood street, children playing on sidewalks, neighbors tending to their gardens. He settled into his favorite chair, reflecting on the morning. Despite the humiliation he had experienced, he felt no bitterness. He reminded himself that not all people would understand or behave correctly, but his response could set an example for others. He took out a photo of his daughter from the table. She was a powerful, successful woman, and he admired her not just for her achievements, but for the values she upheld. In his heart, he knew she would want him to remain composed and dignified no matter the provocation. At the bank, things began to shift subtly. Other employees who had witnessed or heard about the incident started questioning the young employee's behavior. "Do you really think that was professional?" one asked quietly. Another added, "He didn't deserve that. He handled himself better than most people would have." The young employee tried to brush it off, insisting that he had done nothing wrong, but the seed of doubt had been planted. For the first time, he wondered if maybe he had been too harsh, though he was unwilling to admit it aloud. As evening approached, the elderly man took a walk to clear his mind. He passed by the same bank, now quiet with fewer customers. Inside, the young employee was finishing up his shift, still replaying the morning events in his mind, feeling a strange discomfort he couldn't explain. Meanwhile, the elderly man's daughter had begun to hear about the incident through trusted contacts and social media posts. She was known for her sharp insight and decisive action, and upon hearing the story, a sense of concern arose within her. She knew her father's dignity would never allow him to escalate the situation aggressively, but she also knew that lessons needed to be learned and accountability ensured. That evening, the elderly man prepared a simple dinner and settled into his living room. Soft music played in the background, the city's distant sounds drifting through the open window. He reflected on the interactions of the day, considering the deeper meaning behind them. He understood that prejudice and arrogance could appear anywhere, but that calmness, patience, and respect could diffuse tension and create understanding over time. He also realized that influence, wisdom, and quiet strength often held more power than harsh words or immediate confrontation. Meanwhile, the young employee left the bank, walking home with a sense of unease that grew with each step. He replayed the morning events repeatedly, trying to justify his actions, but a small voice of conscience whispered doubts. He had treated someone with disrespect simply based on assumptions and appearances, and even as he tried to convince himself it was acceptable, the thought gnawed at him. Across town, the daughter made plans to address the situation. She knew her father's dignity had been challenged, and she felt a mix of concern and determination. She wanted to ensure that the incident would not be repeated, and that the employee would understand the importance of respect and professionalism. Yet she also wanted to approach the matter strategically, without creating unnecessary public conflict. She valued teaching lessons through accountability and example, rather than anger or punishment alone. The next morning, the elderly man received a small note at his door from a neighbor who had heard about the bank incident. It read simply, "You handled yourself with great dignity yesterday." Many of us noticed and admired it. The man smiled softly, feeling a quiet satisfaction. He knew that even small acts of calm and patience could influence others, sometimes more powerfully than confrontation or argument. Back at the bank, employees quietly discussed the events of the day, some expressing regret for not intervening, others puzzled by the young employee's behavior. The atmosphere had shifted subtly, a sense of tension underlying the usual routine. The young employee felt it too, an unspoken awareness that he had not acted appropriately, even if he could not fully articulate why. As the sun set, painting the city in hues of orange and pink, the elderly man settled by his window with a cup of tea. He watched the people on the streets below, reflecting on human behavior, kindness, and respect. He thought of his daughter, proud of her accomplishments but more proud of the values she upheld. He knew that one day, this incident would be addressed properly, not through anger but through accountability and understanding. He felt ready to face whatever came next, confident that dignity, patience, and calmness would guide him as always. The day closed with quiet contemplation. The elderly man remained a symbol of calm resilience in the face of disrespect, showing that patience and dignity could withstand arrogance and prejudice. The young employee, though unaware, had experienced the first stirrings of realization about the consequences of his actions. And the daughter, sensing the need to intervene, began preparing for a measured, thoughtful approach that would ensure respect, understanding, and accountability prevailed. The story, though still unfolding, hinted at lessons yet to be learned and changes yet to come. The next morning, the elderly man woke early, as was his routine. Sunlight streamed gently through the curtains, casting a warm glow across his living room. He brewed a cup of coffee and sat in his favorite chair by the window, watching the city slowly wake. He thought about the events at the bank over the past 2 days. Though he had chosen to remain calm and composed, he could not ignore that someone's arrogance had caused discomfort, not just to him, but potentially to others as well. He knew the young employee had acted without understanding, but he also understood that accountability sometimes required intervention. Across town, his daughter, a powerful and influential CEO, had started to hear the story of the incident through her network. Friends, colleagues, and acquaintances mentioned it casually, not realizing the full extent of her connection. As the details came together, she recognized the seriousness of what had occurred. Her father, dignified and patient, had faced disrespect, and she could not let it pass without action. She considered the approach carefully, wanting to address the situation in a way that would teach a lesson but also uphold the values of respect and professionalism she valued. In her office, surrounded by the quiet hum of computers and the soft rustle of paperwork, she reviewed the information she had received. Her father's calmness and composure impressed her deeply, and she felt a strong sense of responsibility to act. She began drafting emails to the bank's regional management, framing her inquiries as routine corporate oversight rather than personal involvement. She wanted to assess the situation, understand the behavior of the staff, and ensure proper measures were taken. She knew she could wield influence quietly, without immediate confrontation, allowing the truth to surface naturally. Meanwhile, the elderly man went about his day. He visited the local market to pick up fresh vegetables and bread. The shopkeeper greeted him warmly, noticing a faint smile on his face. "You seem in good spirits today," the shopkeeper remarked. The man replied calmly, "I am well, thank you. Some days bring challenges, but patience helps to see them through." He felt a quiet pride in maintaining his composure. As he moved through the market, neighbors waved and exchanged greetings, some unaware of the incident at the bank, others having heard snippets of the story. It was a reminder that even small actions could ripple through a community. Back at the bank, the young employee continued his daily routine, oblivious to the growing awareness of his behavior. He had spoken to a few coworkers, who cautiously suggested that perhaps his treatment of the elderly man had been inappropriate. He shrugged off the advice, believing he had acted correctly. Yet a subtle unease lingered, a small voice questioning his actions. He could not yet identify it, but it was there, a seed of doubt beginning to grow. The daughter arranged a discreet meeting with the bank's regional manager under the guise of a routine corporate review. She asked thoughtful questions about staff conduct, customer service complaints, and professional standards. The regional manager responded politely but with some hesitation, sensing that something was unusual about the inquiries. She remained calm, her voice composed, her questions precise. She was gathering information, assessing the situation carefully, and preparing to address the issue effectively without creating unnecessary conflict. Meanwhile, the elderly man returned home, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. He took a short nap in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the window, the warmth a quiet comfort against the lingering stress of recent days. Upon waking, he prepared a simple meal, mindful of his health and routine. Though he had endured a humiliating experience, he felt a sense of peace in knowing that he had maintained his dignity and calmness throughout the ordeal. He believed that patience and measured response were often more effective than immediate confrontation. Late that afternoon, the daughter received a detailed report from the bank. It described the incident, the employee's behavior, and customer complaints. She read carefully, noting every detail and reflecting on the implications. She felt a surge of determination. This was not merely about a rude employee, it was about setting a precedent for respect and accountability. She knew her father had handled the situation with grace, but she also knew it was necessary to intervene to ensure lessons were learned and similar situations were prevented in the future. She decided on a strategy that combined discretion with authority. She would first meet the employee privately, understand his perspective, and then reveal her identity in connection to the elderly man. The goal was to create awareness, encourage accountability, and foster a genuine understanding of respect and professionalism. She wanted the employee to learn, not just be punished, believing that transformation through understanding was more meaningful than anger or public embarrassment. In the evening, the elderly man took a quiet walk through a nearby park. Children played on swings and neighbors strolled along the paths. He paused for a moment, breathing in the cool evening air, reflecting on the events and the lessons they offered. He felt gratitude for his daughter's wisdom and foresight, confident that she would handle the situation with care and intelligence. He also reflected on the importance of resilience, patience, and dignity in daily life, recognizing that these qualities could quietly influence others and inspire change without confrontation. At home, he settled by his window, watching the city lights begin to sparkle as night fell. He listened to the distant sounds of the city, the hum of cars, the laughter of children returning from play, the occasional bark of a dog. These familiar sounds reminded him of life's continuity, of challenges faced and overcome, and of the importance of maintaining calm and dignity in all circumstances. He sipped his tea, a sense of quiet satisfaction filling him, knowing that he had faced adversity with grace and that change was quietly underway, guided by wisdom and measured action. That night, he wrote in his notebook, reflecting on patience, human behavior, and the power of calm response. He understood that one day the young employee would have to face the consequences of his actions, but he also knew that anger was not necessary to guide that outcome. The daughter's intervention would ensure accountability, but it would also serve as a lesson in professionalism and respect, reinforcing the values that the elderly man held dear. Meanwhile, the daughter made final preparations for the meeting with the bank employee. She reviewed the details once more, considering every angle, every possible reaction. She practiced her words, ensuring that they would convey authority, clarity, and fairness. She understood that this was not simply about reprimanding an employee. It was about teaching a lesson in human decency, professionalism, and respect. She knew that the young man's arrogance had caused harm, but she also believed in the power of guidance and constructive accountability. The day closed with a sense of quiet anticipation. The elderly man rested, confident that the situation would be handled thoughtfully. The daughter prepared to act, ensuring that the right message would be communicated effectively. And the young employee, still unaware of the full extent of the situation, began to feel an unspoken tension building, a foreshadowing of the lessons he was about to learn. The story, unfolding quietly yet powerfully, set the stage for a confrontation that would not be about anger or humiliation, but about understanding, respect, and the importance of human dignity. The next morning, the bank seemed quieter than usual, the hum of activity slower, as if the building itself anticipated something unusual. The young employee arrived on time, his steps confident, yet a small part of him felt a strange unease that he could not explain. He busied himself with preparing his counter, arranging forms and pens, trying to focus on routine tasks. He glanced around, noticing that some of his colleagues gave him furtive looks, their expressions suggesting concern or disapproval. He ignored them, trying to convince himself that everything was normal. Meanwhile, the daughter arrived in the city, carrying herself with quiet confidence. She dressed simply yet elegantly, her demeanor calm and authoritative. She entered the bank and requested a private meeting with the young employee, framing it as a standard corporate discussion about customer service and professional conduct. The employee, unaware of her identity or her connection to the elderly man, agreed. Curious but somewhat skeptical, the two sat in a small conference room. The door closed, the hum of the bank muted behind them. The daughter spoke first, her tone calm but firm. I wanted to discuss some recent customer interactions and the importance of professionalism and respect in all situations, she said. She explained that she had been reviewing feedback and had noticed some concerning reports regarding interactions with clients. She asked open-ended questions, encouraging the employee to reflect on his actions without revealing the true reason for the meeting. The young man, still confident, began to recount his perspective, unaware that his arrogance would soon be challenged in ways he could not predict. As the conversation continued, the daughter maintained a composed demeanor, listening carefully and taking notes. She asked pointed questions about how he handled difficult clients, how he ensured respect for every customer, and whether he considered the broader impact of his words. The employee, still unaware of the true context, answered honestly, perhaps a little defensively. He spoke about efficiency, following rules and maintaining control at the counter. He felt he was justified in his actions, though he noticed a subtle intensity in her gaze that made him uncomfortable. After he had spoken, the daughter paused and looked at him directly. "I want you to understand something important," she said gently. "Respect and professionalism are not just about following rules. They are about treating people with dignity, no matter who they are, how they appear, or how much money they have. Every interaction leaves a mark, and the way we conduct ourselves can build trust or break it." Her voice was calm but carried authority, and for the first time, the young employee felt a flicker of unease. Then she revealed the truth. "The client you spoke to recently, the elderly man you treated disrespectfully, is my father. I am the CEO of my company, and I take issues of respect and fairness very seriously." The room seemed to pause. The employee's eyes widened in shock. His confident demeanor faltered, replaced by confusion, disbelief, and then a rising panic. He realized instantly the gravity of his actions and how serious the consequences could be. The daughter continued, maintaining her composure. "This is not about punishment, although accountability is important. It is about learning and understanding the impact of our behavior. Prejudice, arrogance, and disrespect have no place in professional or personal life. You have the opportunity to reflect on your actions and make amends, which is far more meaningful than mere reprimand." Her words were firm but not cruel, allowing the young employee to absorb the lesson rather than feel humiliated. For a few moments, silence filled the room. The young man struggled to find words, his usual confidence shattered. He attempted a weak explanation, citing stress and oversight, but the daughter listened calmly, nodding occasionally, giving him space to process. She then outlined concrete steps he needed to take: a formal apology to the elderly man, participation in sensitivity and professional conduct training, and ongoing evaluation of his interactions with clients. The young employee, now fully aware of the seriousness of his actions, nodded repeatedly, his voice shaky as he promised to comply. The daughter emphasized that true growth came from acknowledging mistakes, understanding their impact, and committing to change. She explained that this was an opportunity to rebuild trust, both with customers and within the bank's team. He could not simply return to his routine and ignore what had happened. He needed to demonstrate genuine improvement. Throughout the conversation, the daughter maintained a calm authority, never raising her voice, never threatening, but her presence and words carried undeniable weight. The young employee felt the weight of his arrogance, the shame of his assumptions, and the responsibility to correct them. He began to understand that his behavior had consequences far beyond what he had imagined, not just for himself but for the people he interacted with every day. After the meeting, the daughter left the bank quietly, having delivered her message clearly and effectively. She knew the lesson had been received, though the journey toward genuine understanding and change would take time. She felt satisfied that the situation had been addressed thoughtfully, ensuring accountability while maintaining dignity for everyone involved. Meanwhile, the elderly man received a phone call later that day. The young employee, following the guidance provided by the daughter, called to apologize. His voice was sincere, tinged with nervousness and humility. "I want to apologize for my behavior the other day. It was wrong, and I did not treat you with the respect you deserve," he said. The elderly man listened, his calmness evident even through the phone. He accepted the apology graciously, acknowledging the young man's sincerity. "Thank you for your words. I appreciate your effort to make things right," he replied. His response reflected patience, wisdom, and the belief that people could change when guided appropriately. In the following days, the bank implemented staff training sessions focused on respect, sensitivity, and professionalism. The young employee participated actively, learning to recognize biases, manage difficult interactions constructively, and treat every customer with dignity. His colleagues noticed the change, some expressing surprise at the transformation, others admiration for his willingness to learn. The elderly man remained a quiet observer of the process, confident that the right measures had been taken and that the incident had become a valuable lesson for the future. Throughout this period, the daughter maintained communication with her father, checking in to ensure he felt respected and supported. They discussed the importance of patience, accountability, and measured response, reinforcing the values that had guided them through the experience. The elderly man expressed pride in how the situation had been handled, noting that dignity and calmness had not only protected him, but had also facilitated a meaningful resolution. The story spread quietly through the community and the bank, serving as a subtle reminder of the importance of respect and professionalism. Customers and colleagues observed the changes in discussions, reflecting on their own behavior and interactions. The young employee, once arrogant and dismissive, began to embody the lessons he had learned, realizing that true authority came not from superiority or condescension but from respect, empathy, and understanding. By the end of the week, the bank felt a subtle but noticeable shift. Staff were more mindful of their behavior. Customers were treated with greater care, and the culture of the workplace had begun to evolve. The young employee, humbled by the experience, continued to grow, now understanding the weight of his words and actions, and striving to make better choices in every interaction. The elderly man, observing these changes, felt a quiet satisfaction. The ordeal had tested his patience and composure, but it had also demonstrated the power of calm dignity, thoughtful intervention, and responsible influence. He reflected on the lessons learned, confident that both the young employee and the wider community had gained insight from the experience. Through measured action, accountability, and a focus on understanding rather than punishment, respect and professionalism had been restored. As the sun set on the city, casting a warm golden glow across the streets and buildings, the elderly man walked through a quiet park, reflecting on the journey that had unfolded. The incident at the bank had begun as a moment of disrespect, yet it had grown into a lesson in humility, patience, and human dignity. He felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that change had been achieved not through anger or confrontation, but through thoughtful guidance, understanding, and the quiet power of integrity. The city woke to a quiet, gentle morning, the streets bathed in soft sunlight, and the distant sounds of people beginning their day. The elderly man stepped outside for his morning walk, as was his habit. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers from nearby gardens. He moved at a steady pace, reflecting on the events of the past week. The encounter at the bank had tested him, challenged his patience, and reminded him of the importance of calm, dignity, and perseverance. Yet he also recognized that change had occurred, subtly but meaningfully, and that his patience had played a role in guiding that change. At the bank, the young employee arrived early, his posture less confident than before, replaced by a sense of humility and awareness. He had spent the past week attending sensitivity and professional conduct training, learning about the importance of respect, empathy, and understanding. His interactions with customers had changed, guided by reflection and accountability. He was still adjusting, but he carried a newfound respect for the people he served and a deep understanding of the weight of his words. The daughter, continuing to balance her responsibilities as a CEO, monitored the situation quietly. She maintained communication with her father and the bank's management, ensuring that the lessons were not only understood but applied. She believed that true change was demonstrated through consistent behavior, and that accountability should be combined with opportunity for growth. She knew that anger or punishment alone would not create lasting understanding. Patience and thoughtful guidance were necessary. That afternoon, the elderly man received a formal letter from the bank. It detailed the actions taken. The employee had issued a written apology, participated in a comprehensive training program, and agreed to regular supervision to ensure professionalism. The letter expressed the bank's commitment to respect and service, acknowledging the incident and the steps taken to address it. He read it carefully, feeling a sense of quiet satisfaction. Justice had not been sought through confrontation or anger, but through careful, thoughtful action. He felt proud that the situation had been resolved in a manner that upheld dignity for all involved. As he walked to his favorite cafe later in the day, he noticed the subtle changes in the world around him. People he passed smiled politely, nodding greetings. Staff at the cafe were attentive and courteous. He reflected on how small actions could ripple through a community, shaping interactions and fostering a culture of respect. Even the young employee at the bank had undergone a transformation, and this shift had begun to influence others around him. The elderly man felt a sense of hope, recognizing that positive change, when guided by patience and dignity, could extend far beyond a single interaction. In the city park, children played and neighbors exchanged greetings. The elderly man paused to watch a group of children helping an older neighbor carry groceries. The scene reminded him of the importance of empathy, understanding, and cooperation. He thought about the bank incident and realized that it had been a moment of teaching, not just for the employee but for everyone who witnessed or learned of it. The lessons of respect, patience, and accountability had spread quietly, shaping attitudes and behavior. That evening, the elderly man and his daughter met for dinner at a small, quiet restaurant. They spoke about the week's events, sharing reflections and insights. He expressed pride in how she had handled the situation, ensuring that accountability was paired with understanding. She, in turn, admired her father's patience and composure, recognizing that his example had laid the foundation for meaningful change. Their conversation was warm, thoughtful, and reflective, highlighting the bond between them and the shared values that guided their actions. The young employee, now more aware and conscientious, continued to interact with customers in a professional and respectful manner. Colleagues noticed the difference, some commenting on his growth, others quietly admiring his commitment to change. He felt a sense of humility and responsibility that had been absent before. He understood that true professionalism was not simply following rules, but treating every individual with respect and care, regardless of their background or appearance. Over the next few days, the community around the bank also began to notice subtle improvements. Customers reported more positive interactions, staff displayed greater attentiveness, and the culture of the workplace had shifted. The elderly man's experience, once a moment of humiliation, had become a catalyst for broader change. It was a reminder that patience, dignity, and thoughtful intervention could transform situations that initially seemed negative or discouraging. The elderly man continued his routines with a sense of calm satisfaction. He walked through the city streets, visited the market, and spent time in the park. Each interaction, each observation, reinforced the lessons of the past week. He reflected on human behavior, the power of patience, and the importance of guiding change through understanding rather than anger. The experience had strengthened his belief in the quiet influence of integrity and the ripple effect of thoughtful actions. In the evenings, he wrote in his notebook, capturing reflections on patience, dignity, accountability, and empathy. He considered how small acts of calm and respect could influence the world around him, shaping behavior, attitudes, and understanding. He noted the transformation of the young employee, the response of the